Hello, guys, and welcome to another MSC Performance Podcast. Hope you're all well. Hope you're doing all right in the lockdown. We've obviously recently tried to pick up the frequency of the podcasts we've been doing, so really hope you've been enjoying them, guys. As always, if you've got any feedback on them, then please feel free to get in touch. Drop us a message, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you've got. So in regards to today's podcast, we've got a really interesting one. A little while back, we put out some bit of a Q&A on social media. So we've got 3 questions that have come back that we think are really interesting and we'd like to expand on and give some sort of thorough answers to. So that's going to be the basis of today's podcast, is to go through those 3 questions in some real good detail. So it's almost going to be one podcast, but split into 3 different topics. So should be a really interesting one today. So the 3 topics are all a little bit different. So one's going to be very much rugby based. Also carries over very much to any sort of field sports, but I got a question recently which coincides with the blog that I wrote the other day, just with a couple of questions regarding that. And now that the season is officially over for the 2020-21 season, what are the plans for getting ready for next season? How do we go about that? So I talk a little bit about the fact that we're aiming for a September start and how to best prepare yourself to get ready for that after such a long time with no rugby. So we're going to go into some detail on that. We're also going to be talking a little bit about protein, and Luke will be specifically going into some detail there, as we had a question about, if I'm not doing as much training volume, what do I do with my protein? What does the intake need to be? It's a really interesting subject. So I think you'll all get a lot from that. And then we're also going to talk about velocity tracking as well. So Luke's recently acquired a new toy, which is a velocity tracker. So it's track his force output and his speed during his lifts. And I think a couple of people saw before the lockdown Luke training with this, and have just got a couple of questions. So before we get started, let's have some chat from the team and see how we all are. So Luke, are you looking forward to that chat about the velocity tracker and the protein today? And how have you been at lockdown?
I am looking forward to it. Evidently, by me moving around a lot, I woke up 20 minutes ago, so trying to find the spot that makes me look the least tired. But yeah, apart from that, I'm good. A lot better routine now these last couple of weeks, trying to get everything back to some kind of normality and some kind of routine while things aren't 100%. But yeah, things are pretty good, man. Can't complain.
Fantastic. Yeah. What about the squad?
Just realised that I'm wearing exactly the same top as last time, so this is now my dedicated podcast top. I'm going to wear it every single time. And try and wash it each week, but we'll see. But apart from that,
I presumed it was Naim. I presumed Naim had bought it you, and she says, like, to show that you really like the present, you've got to wear it every single time you go on video.
You will like it. No. Go on. I'm good.
I was going to say that I didn't wake up like 20 minutes ago, and I had the class with the squad, Metcon crew, and I'm wearing a thematic t-shirt as well, and it was really good to catch up with everyone. And the attendance was quite high again, so it was really good in terms of like motivation amongst us. I think everyone kind of has their up and down, as they were saying, but it's just good to kind of crack on. So that was good morning start with the crew.
Sonia, if I wanted to buy one of those t-shirts, where could I buy that from? It's a nice t-shirt.
So when you open the MSC Performance website, straight on the top right corner is a big button saying merch.
Get amongst it.
So you can click there and get one of these lovely Metcon Crew t-shirts. Yeah.
On there.
Fantastic. I was just wondering, I didn't. Yeah, I think that's the one. Yeah, if you go on the website, big button merch, and buy some stash. Shameless plug there. Fantastic, guys. Right, I might crack on then. We'll go we're going to go into the rugby question first of all. So if you don't like rugby, skip about 20 minutes. No, I'm only joking. We're gonna, with this rugby question, it does, as I say, it was for those who know me, I play a bit of rugby, and this question is very much directed at that. But if you play any other field sport, this will be very, very relevant. I know we've trained a lot of American footballers over the years, even football players and, guys like that. So this will be very, very relevant to them. And there's also a lot that you could take from this as general pop as well, just in terms of how to manage your training load. So I'll kind of crack on. So the question was, recently this week, we've got confirmation officially from the national leagues that the season is off. We kind of knew it was coming anyway, but it's been a bit of a tricky training period because you were never quite sure. Now, obviously, we always have this very short off season in rugby where you get 4 weeks and then you're back to pre-season and you're getting flogged, and progress in the gym can sometimes be a little bit tough to make. So with the cancellation of the season, at least that gives you a bit of an idea as to, right, okay, it's a write-off now. We're in end of January, and the chances are we're going to be starting in September. We're certainly not going to be starting before that, maybe some pre-season games in August, but in terms of league systems, we're going to be back to it in September. So that now, at least it's some clarity that, we might, there was a bit of panic. Will we be back in February, March? We'll be playing a few games, or we have any mini leagues or tournaments, but at least that's nipped in the bud now. We know it's all, it's over that season. So the question then begs, well, what next? I've got until September. I've almost got this NFL style American football off season, which is obviously a lot longer than your average rugby off season. So there's no excuses now, apart from perhaps the fact that the gyms are shut, obviously. But there's no excuses to get some good bases in place for when we start back in September. It's obviously a lot longer than we'd normally have. So that was the question I had, really, was like, how are we going to get ready? Now, I've just written a blog on this, which you'll be able to find again on our website or our social media channels. So essentially, the first things first, if you haven't started training yet, or doing any sort of running, any sort of weight training, or body weight sort of training, whatever you can do, depending on what equipment you've got, start now. That sounds obvious, but there's going to be a lot of lads, with rugby players, some rugby players, semi-professional and amateur level, love the gym, and some don't. Some are just very good rugby players, and obviously you can get by and reach a very good level at just being very good at your sport. But as we know, if I come up against someone with equal technical ability, it's going to be the stronger guy and the more powerful guy that wins that battle. So, what can we do to best prepare ourselves? Now, we are all going to be starting at different levels. So the blog explains this in some good detail. But as I said, make a start now, build your base. Don't leave it till the last minute. Okay. So with this amount of time that you've got, okay, if we look at the overall macro cycle we've got now, let's say it's, we're early, coming up to early Feb. Okay, and we've got until September. So you've got roughly a sort of 7-month window there to work with. Okay, so what a lot of rugby players will do in the off season is they'll bodybuild the whole way through this. They won't do any running or any sort of conditioning work. They won't do any sort of strength stuff, and then they'll go back. But again, with the time we've got, there's no excuses to try and not hit all the components. So in rugby, we're very much looking, the most popularized method is a vertical integration method. So in rugby, we know we need to be strong, we need to be powerful, we need to be fast, We need to be agile, but we also need to have enough of an engine, an aerobic base, to be able to last 80 minutes and carry those qualities over the period of a full game. So we need to train all of those qualities. Now, that can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. And when I talk about the vertical integration model, we're sort of talking about hitting all of those components all year round. Now, the thing we have to look at is it's very difficult to try and maximize your strength training, maximize your hypertrophy work, maximize your aerobic, your speed training, everything all at once. So when you're using that vertical integration model, we're trying to put that almost using some similarities with old school sort of block training, really, block periodization, where, you know, in old school block periodization, you'd say, right, I've got 6 months, I'm going to do 2 months of, you know, hypertrophy work, I'm going to do 2 months of strength, and then I'm going to convert into power. Okay. But we know now that through tons, you know, through decades of research, that if I don't train strength for X amount of period of time, my strength levels are going to drop off. Therefore, my total force output is lower. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to produce the same static strength, the same dynamic strength and power, etc., etc. The same with speed. Okay. If my, you know, especially for a back or a winger in rugby, obviously speed kills. Speed's what's going to, you know, be your biggest asset potentially. So do I want to go 6 months, 9 months without training speed? No, you want to train that all the time. But what we're going to do is look at trying to prioritize certain bits. Okay, so I'm going to train all the components. Okay, I'm going to do my strength, I'm going to do my power, I'm going to do my speed work, I'm going to do my aerobic work. Okay, but I'm just going to start to prioritize little bits and pieces. So at the moment, because there's such a big you know, sort of gap now until we start, it is a good opportunity to prioritize certain things. So at the moment, you could focus on looking to accumulate lots of volume. You could look at doing lots of accessory and, let's call it, hypertrophy work, with nice high rep counts, maintaining strength, maintaining a little bit of power. So you just adjust your training where the first couple of months there's a big emphasis on accumulating volume. Okay, this will be beneficial because it's a lot of time and attention, which is obviously going to help build muscle mass, and also it's going to build a lot of tissue tolerance and tissue tolerance for higher loads and heavier loads further down the line. So in terms of your weight training at the moment, it might very much look like a sort of hypertrophy focus, a little bit of strength maintenance, a little bit of power. And then in terms of your conditioning, which I tend to sort of separate the two, in terms of your aerobic work, this can be built up nice and steadily. And we can look at, again, accumulating some volume at lower intensities at the moment, focusing on technique, gradually, very gradually building the mileage in over the course of 16 to 20 weeks. With your speed work, do we need to be sprinting absolutely flat out at the moment? The answer is no. What we can do is we can work at lower intensities with our sprints. Now, with sprinting, the research will show that we've got to be working at 95% plus intensity to accumulate any sort of speed gains. But bear in mind, a lot of you would have been pretty inactive over the last year, maybe not, you know, playing any rugby, therefore not doing any sprinting. So especially for the guys who haven't done any sprinting work over that time, a great way to start is with some hill sprints. So with hill sprints, you're obviously not going to be hitting top speed. Okay, you're obviously going to be faster on the flat than you are up a hill. So the hill will just slow you down enough where you can work at high intensities, but not be accumulating quite as much velocity. Okay, and with guys' strength levels being probably down a little bit at the moment, okay, if we're not strong enough to absorb those high velocity forces, then that's where injuries can happen. So just going up the hill, okay, can just slow us down a little bit, but we can still get into some good sprint work. We can build a little bit of good power. We can work on our sprint mechanics, and it's a real nice way of just kind of being steady with that velocity, but still getting some good speed gains. Again, with the condition.
On that note, Mark, with the hill. On that note with the hill, because I think when people say hill sprints, like loads of people get this different impression of what they think a hill sprint is. What do you recommend as like a good incline for people to begin with? Because you say hill climb and you see people trying to run the steepest hill that they can, where it's almost like a scramble versus an actual sprint. So do you have like a general recommendation of like how much of an incline? I've seen you on the like the one by MSC, so it's like a few degrees up. Like what would be a decent?
Yeah, so my maths and my trigonometry is not that great in terms of knowing angles and degrees, but it's a good question, because what you'll find is, and it's the same when guys do weighted sprints, is that they'll put so much weight on the sled, or the hill will be at such an incline that, like you say, it's like a kind of scramble getting up the hill. You know, legs all over the place. You're pretty much on your hands and knees, and you know, with that sort of thing, that can be a very good, almost military style of, aerobic conditioning or lactate. But when we're looking to improve the speed, we don't really need much of an incline to slow us down a little bit. And it's the same with weighted sprints. Some coaches will differ and say, let's load them up and go heavier, but I don't tend to really go much above 50% body weight really on the sled, and that obviously depends on the strength levels and the skill of the person. But it really doesn't need to be that high the hill to answer your question. Like, just a few degrees, something that's going to slow you down significantly, that you're not hitting top velocities, and therefore you're just protecting yourself a little bit from injury. At the same time, it's a little challenging. At the same time, we can keep sprint mechanics. So,
Mark,
that's what we look for.
If someone's, the first session was a hill sprint session, like how far, how many reps, what sort of rest, how would you begin?
So I'd look at, if you've got a 6-month model, for example, there's plenty of time to build towards top speed. So even with a short amount of time, I'd still follow the same process I'm about to say. But so I would look at sorry, what was the question again?
Say someone's right, I'm going to start doing hill sprints. Okay, for my first session, how far would I do? How many times would I do it? How
distance and volume and stuff.
Yeah,
cool. So
10 reps of 100 meters, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So to begin with, and again, especially this will be very relevant at the moment, because a lot of guys wouldn't have done anything for 6 months or so in terms of top end sprint work. So we need to, it's very, very similar to your strength training, very similar to your aerobic stuff. We've got to start off with a relatively low amount of volume, say moderate volume, moderate intensity, and then we're going to look to build volume as we go. Okay, and then we're going to hit a sort of real, when you get to your real meat and potatoes of the pre-season, where we're working really, really hard, your volume's going to be at your highest. We're going to be looking at certain sessions of pushing the intensity along with that, and then we would reduce the volume as we get closer to the season. And then during the season, generally speaking, your match play and your training will take care of most of it. You'd maybe do once a week, you'd go out and do some top end sprint, maybe before a training session. So, for example, if you're hitting hills, anywhere between sort of, your first couple of weeks, anywhere between 5 and 10 sets, which sounds like a lot, but you'd keep the distance very minimal as well. You might be just doing 5 meters, 10 meters, 20 meters, that sort of work. Wouldn't really go anywhere above 30 meters on that. So you're going to keep the volume sort of fairly low. You're going to look to build that. And then, as I say, you'll hit that peak and then drop off again as we get a little bit closer to the season. So first few weeks, take it steady, build up the volume gradually, and go from there really.
Cool.
Do you think they should change the name from hill sprints to slope sprints to stop people doing really high sprints?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea actually. Yeah, I think as I said, like that'd be my biggest tip for any sort of hill and sprint type work, hill and sled type work, is just remember what you're trying to get out of it. So again, going in too steep with the hill or too heavy with the sled, sprint mechanics all over the place. Are we actually improving the factors that we want to improve really. So that's something.
So like, you know, all this because you, as an S&C coach, like you probably know what to do and what to train. So have the other guys been given any like sort of plan or program or advice from like your team or like your team coach? Because like, you know, you're obviously going to keep training and stuff and doing bits, but what about the rest of the team?
Yeah, it's you know, we've got we've had certain running programs during the sort of off season to follow. Good old Chengi's thrown in some good content as well in terms of things that we should be doing. And again, it's a level where, you know, a semi-professional level where you've got very good, talented rugby players. They're not necessarily monsters in the gym or are massively passionate about the gym. So you've got some guys who are mad keen into it, some who aren't as much, and just rely on the talent, which at our level you can just about get away with. But obviously you're not maximising any potential that way, but you can get by. There's bits to follow, and again in that semi-pro environment, when you're not in the club every day, it's quite hard to monitor how everyone's doing. So it's going to be really interesting to see when we go back, you know, who's in good shape and who's not. I mean, to be fair, most of the boys are quite into running and keeping their aerobic base up. So I'd imagine the lads will be in pretty good shape when it comes back to that. I think my biggest fear would be, potential for injury and potential for, when we get back into a bit of gameplay and contact stuff. Because
I think what you're saying now about like starting now versus cramming right at the end is going to be the key to people staying injury free, because otherwise what's going to happen is much like not getting ready for an exam is, come August, everyone's going to shit themselves because they haven't done anything, and they're just going to do this mad amount of work. And it's going to be this ridiculous spike in volume, and then they're going to come in and get injured. So it's going to work either one way or the other.
100%.
I quite like when you talk about the tapering process for like rugby teams, because it doesn't get talked about a lot. And if you look at like movies like Rocky IV, the guy like trains ridiculously hard like the day before the fight, like he's running up this stupid hill fighting a bear. And it's like in reality that's not how people train for professional team sports. You peak in your volume probably like, I don't know the details, but maybe like 3-4 weeks out, and then you start to taper back. And it's almost like you said, maintaining while you're in season. But people think that, right, the season's around the corner, I need to pick it up. And the reality is everything that you build is so far out, and then you taper it off as you get close to the competition.
Exactly.
If you're not built it up now, you've got nothing to taper from. You can't taper from nothing.
Exactly. And it's such a good opportunity now to, okay, some people aren't going to have access to weights and things like that. But, as Max and myself have spoke about in podcasts previously, there's things you can do. Also in terms of things like you're running, just even if it's once a week at the moment, just building up a bit of tissue tolerance, just some very steady aerobic work, maybe some tempo work, things like that will just build you a base, because we know when we go back, if it's July or if it's August, it's going to be a 4-week, 6-week panic before we start the season. So, at least, I mean, even just from a conditioning point of view, just build yourself a base, build up some tolerance to running. So when you go back, you're not going from 0 to turbo, straight away. And even if you haven't got access to weight training at the moment and things like that, do your body weight isometrics, find a band, find something that you can use for a bit of resistance. So you can at least build up, a little bit of a strength base and time and attention, so that again you get back into the gym, if that's whenever that is, and then you've got a base to work from that, and we can build. You're not starting from scratch, and like you say, almost sort of cramming in that that last minute exam style.
Mark, if you were to recommend, like, let's say people got nothing at the moment at their house or whatever, if you'd recommend one piece of kit that's reasonably affordable, what would you recommend to people?
got to be a shout squat machine.
It's got to be seated calf raise. Mate, I think like a kettlebell is just such a good versatile tool. You know, if it's one bit of kit, you know, you can get a lot from a good heavy kettlebell. You get some good swing work in. You can do some nice kind of conditioning based complexes. You know,
like a 16, 20, 24 maybe.
Yeah, 16 to 24 kilo. You can do some tempo squat work, you know, for your strength stuff. So you can get some really good like split, you know, single leg stuff, single leg RDL, split squats. Upper body is going to be, you know, fine for most people in terms of certainly overhead pressing and row variation. So I'd say a kettlebell if you can. Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about a couple of these like protocols that you're using for speed, because I've almost got like the opposite example with I coach a guy for hurling over in Ireland, which is like an absolutely brutal sport. But like he is in the county final and it just keeps getting pushed back. And it's just been confirmed now that the county final is going to be in May. But he's someone who's probably the opposite of most people, where he wants to do more and he wants to do as much as he can. He wants to be the best hurler ever. So I'm almost doing what I can to try and draw him back. So like, we're 6 months out. We don't need to be doing like maximal speed, but we don't need to be doing these ridiculous runs. He wants to do everything and he's an absolute workhorse. So you've got him doing, like you said, weighted sprints for like low volume. And he still then thinks that he's putting this mad output, but actually in reality, it's slowing that velocity down for him, which is absolutely key at the minute while we push that higher strength work. Because I think what you're trying to say at the start is that you just can't train all these qualities at the same time because you can only recover from so much. Because everyone wants to do everything. But if you're pushing that hypertrophy work, you can't push the speed work to full. Something has to give. And it's just realizing that.
That's a great example of coaching and what it is, isn't it? Is dealing with individuals, and you can have some guys that need a bit more of a push, and some guys where you've got to, like the chap you've got, where you've got to rein him back in a little bit, but almost sneakily trick him into thinking he's doing maximal work. And that's smart coaching. But yeah, in regards to that, I mean, I'll quickly, I'm wary I've been sort of going on a bit, but I'll just quickly go into like your micro as well and how to plan that week. And there's various different ways you can do it, and I'll talk about this in the blog, so I won't go too much detail. But this is where you can have your sort of higher intensity days and your lower intensity days, so that you can recover, as Luke's just said. There is, you know, how to train these qualities and recover. So very much try and split your training into a high day, where that's where you're looking at high intensities, so high force output, high velocities. So that can be that would be, for example, you're sprinting in the morning, in the evening, or after the sprinting session, depending on the logistics. That's where you do your heavy lifting. So big compound exercises, low reps, get some weight on the bar. And then the next day, you look at a low day. So that's where we're looking at lower velocities. This can also go low into high, by the way, but just as an example, with your low day, that's where you might look at building an aerobic base. So the velocities are much lower, so therefore the stress on the CNS is a lot lower. You know, it's a non-strenuous session. We can build up some steady aerobic work. We can do our accessories. We can do our single leg work, our unilateral stuff, different planes of movement, etc., etc. So using a high model, get the velocities, the intent, the lifting done on one day. On another day or the next day, do your lower work, your accessory work, your bodybuilding, if you like, alongside a bit of aerobic work. So that's something, again, I'll go into a bit more detail with the blog, but that's something to look out for as well. I mean, as I say, like just the last point really with that, I think, is, again, like as you're prioritizing one thing. So at the moment you might be prioritizing hypertrophy work, then we'd, you know, start to prioritize strength work. There's a good chance to get a good strength block, and then we'd look at, you know, the conversion into power and really trying to push that up as we get closer to season, and dropping the accessory work a little bit. With that as well, when you're with the qualities that aren't as much in terms of importance. So at the moment, hypertrophy might be top, power might be down here, aerobic work might be down here. Use that as a chance to hone in technique. So with your power work, if you want to, you know, get into your Olympic lifting variations and whatnot. You vary submaximal weight, work on your technique. Same with your aerobic work, there's a couple of good articles on nasal breathing, only using, methods to improve your technique and efficiency of your running, of your sprint technique as well. This is a great time to say, right, okay, well, even on my high day, I'm not going absolute maximum velocity, but on my sprint work, what I can do is I can do my A skips, my Bs, I can do, various different skills to improve the skill of that, even though it's of a low priority. It's never low priority, but it's just not the main thing. So we're not draining the CNS through that with loads of volume and intensity, but what we can do is still spend time on it and improve the skill. Okay. And then by the time, let's take that, let's say a hang power clean, for example, we'll work on a technique. And then as we come closer to the season and the power output becomes a higher priority, we've developed the skill through that time to really push that now and hit some higher numbers than we probably would do before. And that's the same with your running and your sprinting. So we've built the skill. Now when we get closer to the season, that becomes a priority. We're a better runner than we were previously. So high days, low days, list of things in importance. The most important things, hit them hard. The less important things, hit the skill hard, but not the total tonnage. I've been talking for ages, guys. Sorry, but we'll probably move on there, I think, unless there's any questions.
I was going to say, have you been given like a definite start date for next season?
No. We're just guessing it's going to be September. I mean, who knows? It might not even be that, but it's definitely not going to be this season now. So our season would normally end of April. So that's a write-off. Then we'd have the summer. So realistically, it's not going to be any rugby till August, September.
So have you got like a bit of like a contingency to if it gets knocked back again, you'd have to go back into, you just repeat the cycle, but like potentially a shorter cycle?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, if it's like, if you get closer to the date, and it turns out it's going to be January, for example, then yeah, you've probably still got enough time there to almost, recycle and go back and just work in shorter blocks. Yeah. So again, you might say, right, I've almost peaked there, and then there's a delay. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back into a bit more hypertrophy work. Let's go back into a bit of skill development with the other bits and pieces, and go from there, just with shorter mesocycles, essentially.
Cool. Okay, so the second question that we had was regarding our protein, and now that I'm not training as hard, what should I do with protein? Should I keep it high to try and maintain muscle, or should I drop it back? And I mean, I don't know what everyone else is like, but anecdotally, I always, if I've not been training hard, I've always tried to eat more protein, thinking that would be a good way of trying to conserve your gains. Like if I ever go on holiday, I always try, if I'm not training, I always try and eat like fairly high protein, with the thought that would probably be the best thing in terms of maintaining my muscle. Not so much about strength, but yeah, that would be the rationale. And I think a lot of people have that same view, and it's the same with like calories during a deload, or if they're not training, like people think, should they drop the calories? So we're going to go into a little bit of a research study looking into it. It's going to be quite linked actually to the last podcast we did, talking about like how you've got to take aspects of it and remember that they're trying to elicit a response, which I'll get to in a second. So the study was from 2020, and it was looking on if training while on a high protein diet, a moderate protein diet, or a very low protein diet, would that help you maintain your muscle mass better than one or the other? And the study they did, this is why I say like you've got to take things with a pinch, is it was a immobilization study. So one leg was like normal, one leg was fixed at 40 degrees and there was on crutches. So they were encouraged not to move through the one leg at all. The other leg did like very like single leg isokinetic work and also like leg extension work. So they trained the one leg, the other leg didn't train, and it also didn't move at all, which is a big difference to what would happen for people at the minute, where you're still walking, you're still probably doing little bits of training and exercise, but it was complete immobilization. And the reason is that it's to accelerate the results. It's only a 3-day study. I mean, Sonia and Ben are doing like their dissertations at the minute, and they know how hard it is to recruit people. So no idea how you got someone to fix a leg for 3 days, knowing it's gonna, going to atrophy ridiculous amounts. So like trying to get people to commit more than that is ridiculous. So it's an acceleration study to try and elicit a certain result. Anyway, so they were put on either 1.6 grams of protein per kilo, 0.5 grams per kilo, or 0.15. They did muscle biopsies to have a look at muscle protein synthesis, and they did MRIs to look at the different muscle size. And there was no difference in the non-trained leg, regardless of the protein that they were on. So even though there's caveats to it, like it was completely immobilized, it indicates that actually being on a high protein diet doesn't do anything to conserve your muscle mass if you're not training at all. What we do think from the study though is that actually like doing that little bit of training, even though the amount of volume and the amount of intensity is going to be ridiculously dropped, doing that is what's going to help create the adaptation. And then to supplement that and to try and optimize it is to keep the protein level high and to keep your kind of everything else that optimizes muscle protein synthesis as good as possible. So sleep, hydration, etc. So I think from the study, if you're not training at all, eating high protein probably isn't going to do anything to conserve your muscle, but you should be aiming to get a little bit of training in. And we know that if you haven't got access to a gym, it's not going to be the same intensity or volume, but doing like even like press ups, squats, and then keeping the protein levels high is going to do more to conserve it than really ramping up that protein harder. There was another study I wanted to talk about linking it, and it's looking at how easy it is to maintain your muscle compared to actually like trying to progress. And there were studies looking at like dropping your training volume by 2/3, so doing a third of your volume. So if you're doing 10 sets before, you're now doing 3 sets, and then also 1/9 of the volume, and seeing the effect that would have on both your strength and your muscle size. And what it seems to be is that even on a third of the volume, you can still like make progress in strength and maintain your muscle size. And even on a 1/9 of your training volume, you can actually maintain your muscle size. So you don't actually need that much amount of training to maintain kind of what you've built up. So if you supplement like the lower volume of training that you're currently doing or the lower intensity with a high to moderate protein diet, that is probably the best thing to do. However, you don't need to ramp the protein up any higher to get the results that you want.
I think that's really interesting. Like that should be a kick up the backside, or like at least a little bit of hope for guys who are like well trained in the gym, and then all of a sudden they've not got access to a gym. Maybe they've got little equipment or zero equipment. Like that should be a real positive and an encouragement to say, do a bit to keep you set, even low level stuff, or what you would consider low level, like your press ups and body weight work, is like actually going to maintain you more than you think for when you go back. So it's interesting.
Another thing, when you link everything in together, when you look at the other research on, like, there's so much now, and Max is doing his studies on it as well, on like high load training versus low load training from a perspective of muscle size and maintaining muscle strength. And we know that if you take things to a similar RPE, set by set basis, it roughly equates to the same amount of muscle hypertrophy. So you might be used to doing sets of 6 to 8 reps on a bench press, but if you do an actual press up set to a 6 RPE, it's really difficult, but it should elicit the same amount of response. So you can easily, like, you don't have to do 10 sets of press ups to 6 RPE. If you take the research that we've got, you can drop it by a third. So if you're used to doing 10 sets of pressing to around that 6 to 7 RPE, you could drop it down to 3 or 4 sets a week, like 2 days of doing 2 sets of press ups to a 6 to 7 RPE. And that will probably be more than enough to maintain your muscle size while eating like the sufficient protein.
Yeah. So it's sort of like you're probably not going to get much stronger outside of the gym, but like you say, you can do just to not lose.
Well, when Mark talked about the example of the rugby season, and you're talking about like how he didn't touch on that much, but the point was there is that like the hypertrophy work is going to hopefully improve your strength work, which eventually is going to output your speed work. So while doing press ups isn't going to improve your bench press, if that was your goal, it can maintain your muscle size, which is going to do a much better job than not training at all. And that's going to then lead you up to the next block where you get back to bench press. It's going to be in a much better shape. And we can all see it from everyone. And Michael's rugby, the people that have trained versus the people who haven't, and how easy it is to integrate back into normal training. From like Mark said, I'm maintaining, I'm being able to tolerate the amount of work, and actually just on maintaining the qualities that are good for a bench press or whatever you're doing.
At least maintaining your muscle mass, like you say, with the press up work is we know that to put it in simple terms, a bigger muscle has more potential to produce force and produce strength, doesn't it? So even if the skill isn't completely accurate between a press up and a bench press, by maintaining some mass, going back into the bench press, you're gonna recover back to the point where you were before much quicker than if you haven't.
With that
100%.
Did they give a recommended grams per kilogram of protein then if you weren't training? Did they give a recommendation for that, or do you have one that you'd know of? Or
so in terms of doing no training whatsoever,
if you're going on holiday for a week or whatever it may be,
well,
what would you
from what I understand from the study, and again, you've got to take things because it was a full immobilization. So let's say you go on holiday for a week, you're going to be doing a little bit of swimming. I'm not saying that's going to do enough to give you, but it's not full immobilization. Yeah. So I would never in any world recommend doing 0.15 grams of protein per kilo, because for someone that weighs 100 grams, you can't even do it anyway. If you're 100 kilos, you'd be getting 15 grams of protein. Like, it's really difficult to eat that low protein. But like, I just think that you should be putting this ridiculous emphasis on trying to get high protein, which I think a lot of people do think they should do. So if you're not training, I would just aim to eat like your normal amounts of protein. But I wouldn't make this excessive aim to try and get your protein levels higher, because it's not going to lead to you maintaining the muscle tissue. What I would recommend is, like we just said, is just dropping that volume super low, keeping your protein as it normally is, and just trying to get in some kind of training stimulus. And then we know that then the amount of protein is going to support that versus actually helping you maintain the muscle. So does that make sense?
Spend most of your holiday on the toilet.
I was just going to say, I'm glad I've come across this and Luke's brought it up, because like, it just reminds me, maybe not so much in recent years, get a bit older and wiser, but like back in the day, going on holiday, it'd be, you go to, you'd have all inclusive or whatever. It'd just be like, right, I'm not training, but if just get the meat in first, maintain, and then it's like, right, get my protein in, high protein, and then I can, eat the other stuff. It's like I'm literally just lying down on the beach.
Yeah. Like, you have can I have an 8-egg omelette, please, for breakfast?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
This day.
It's just going to maintain, like, it's going to keep the size for the week. Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting to know that you can drop the volume down even as low as like a 9th. I mean, I would still try and do more than that, because these are like the minimums. But if you dropped it by a third, took your work to around a 5 to 6 RPE, and people say 5 to 6 RPE, which means 4 to 5 reps in reserve. But if you take an actual high rep press up set to 4 to 5, if you can't do full press ups on your knees, to an actual legit 6 RPE, it's hard. It's really hard.
Like, there's so much you can do, isn't there? Like, just by dropping tempo, and like, I think a lot of people always focus on reps. It's like, right, most people know we've got to, as we train, create different stress and stimulus to cause an adaptation. Now, it's, go from 10 to 12 to 15 to 20 press ups, like, there's only so much you can go, but by what we forget sometimes is it doesn't have to be the weight that we change or the volume we change. We can change the tempo. We can add in pause variations, etc., with something as simple as a press up.
Exactly. You can
make it.
You can self-limit it in so many ways to make things way more difficult. And if you don't no one likes doing 30 reps on anything, but if you self-limit it by doing a 4-second with a 2-second pause, you won't need to do 30 reps. So there's so many ways to self-limit it. But I think the takeaway from it is during this time of training is keep your protein the same. You don't have to increase it to a ridiculous amount, but be safe in the knowledge that doing that little bit of training is going to help promote muscle protein synthesis more than just eating high protein. The protein is what kind of supplements and optimizes your training. By itself, it does nothing. It's like when people say about the steroids, you take steroids, you've still got to train. I guess it's the same kind of analogy, that you can't just take steroids and become ridiculously muscly. It supplements and it optimizes your training, but it doesn't do it by itself. And I think that's the same with the protein. So eat your normal amounts of protein, try and get your training stimulus in, even if it's massively reduced. Take it down to, by a third if you're really struggling. But but try and push it to a 5 to 6 RPE, and you'll probably do enough to maintain as much muscle tissue as we can. And that's going to help you coming into the next block where things will be more specific back in the gym, whatever your sport is.
Luke, can I ask a question? With this, obviously we're referring very much to the situation of not, gyms not being open and training from home. Would you adopt a similar approach to someone who's injured and immobilized, like the study would suggest? So for a rugby player who's done the knee in and they can't play for 4 weeks, for example.
Well, I think if you look at it on like the body on a global scale versus like the one leg that they can't train. Let's say someone's really hurt their knee, they could probably. It depends. There's always a way to train, and we know that doing movement is absolutely the way to train. So we're talking about like from the whole body. If you're just going to stop training because you've got a bad knee and you play rugby, you're never going to train.
You've seen me hobbling around the gym, mate, with various injuries, and you find a way, don't you?
Tore your bicep, and the next day you're in doing heavy sledge drags. If you want to train, there is a way to train. You see fucking people. There was a powerlifter the other day that had one arm and did every single lift. He did a bench press. He did a deadlift. He's got one arm.
That could be an interesting podcast on its own, actually, isn't it? Like with sports injury and perhaps Max will get another invite if he's lucky on that. But working around injuries.
Yeah. Well, Pat Davison put one the other day, says you can work around every single injury.
Yeah.
Like this last year was the hardest year of mine training. I strained my adductor, strained my back, and I'm still training 4 times a week. And you can train around things really well. So you might not be able to get the same amount of like load through your quad if it's your knee that's uncomfortable, but you still be able to get sufficient loading through the upper body. So in that case, I would keep the protein high. Because the last thing we wanted to switch on was like deloads. And it's the same for the deload. Like a lot of people question, what should I do with my protein, but also what should I do with my calories? Thinking that because they're not training quite as much, let's say they've knocked a third or half of their volume down, they think that they're not expending as many calories. Should I drop my calories down? And I wanted to touch on it as well because yesterday you spoke a little bit about like looking at the day versus actually in this training session how many calories you actually burn, and it's not as much as many people think. So I think that like during a deload week, you should be keeping your protein the same because we know that based off the study that we've just done, but also keep your calories the same. Because if you burn 500 calories, let's say in a session, if you drop your by half, it's still going to be more than 250 calories, but it's only 250 calories extra. You're going to make up more of that through the day. And actually, I think with the overarching aim of the deload to be to improve your recovery, actually, if you're in like the smallest surplus ever, being in that small surplus versus dropping your calories down is probably going to do more for your recovery and less for your weight gain than you actually think. So during a deload, I would keep your calories exactly the same and keep your protein the same with the overarching concept of trying to get fully recovered for your next block. Yeah,
training volumes down a little bit, increase your walking, bit more moving around the week. So essentially, giving your nervous system a rest. It's not necessarily a it's not 2 + 2 = 4. It's not like, right, we're doing less sets, therefore we're losing X amount of calorie expenditure. You can make that up while still getting the recovery. And like you say, by reducing the calories significantly, that's going to limit the recovery and the point of the regeneration phase through the deload.
Exactly. I mean, even if your aim was completely weight loss and it was on a deload, I would still say keep the calories the same. Yeah. Make the activity up elsewhere. If it wasn't weight, like let's say you've dropped your training by a half and you train 4 times a week. So let's say you lose an extra 800 calories a week. That is absolutely, like, in the grand scheme of things, if you have a deload every 6 weeks, is nothing. It's gonna be nothing that derails your weight loss versus having a Domino's, which is 1,600 calories on a weekend. Like increasing your calories by 800 on a deload is going to do absolutely no negative for it. Yeah. So I'd keep your calories and keep your protein.
Increase your low level activity a little bit.
If you want to, even if
you want to.
Yeah. So.
Happy. Interested.
Yeah, cool.
Should we move on to
the third question?
I'm aware that it's the number one based at me, but you can, I guess, chime in with questions. It's about a velocity tracker. So I've recently Very fortunately been given one by my clients, which is very much appreciated. A Rep 1 velocity tracker. And a couple of people have asked, like, what is the use of it and how am I using it? And I had a vision in my head about how I was going to use it. And I haven't quite used it exactly how I thought. So the velocity tracker tracks your speed. It has these different metrics that you can track. And actually the one that I found to be the most useful at the minute is the range of motion one, which I'll talk about in a second, but it tracks your peak velocity, your average velocity, your duration of reps, and what you can do from here through the analysis on it is track, for example, let's say you do a set at 50%, 60%, 70%, it can track, and then you can put in what velocity you want to lift at. So let's say I've got a set at 7 RPE, you can put after a while, you get to know what velocity works out to what kind of percentage and what kind of work. And it can give you like a guide weight based off the input that you've had. So if I've done a lift at 50, 60, 70, and then I need to do a lift at 80% or at this specific velocity, it gives you a number based off your previous sets of what it thinks you should be. And it's actually pretty spot on. An example, I did a pin squat before lockdown, and I put the details in. I said I want to lift it at this velocity, and he said it should be 203 kilos. I did it at 202.5, and it was bang on the velocity that it said it would be. So it's been really useful for trying to put the right weight on the bar. The main thing that I'm using it for now is like as a predictor of my performance. So let's say for squats, I'm warming up to a single at, let's say, 7 RPE. I do a very similar warm-up every single time, and then I've got 2 weights that I use to be indicating of if my performance is up or down versus the last week. So 200 kilos is usually the last one that I do that would indicate if I'm lifting better or worse than the previous weeks. And the key is just writing everything down. So I do 200 kilos, and then I compare it to the previous weeks, and then I look if the speed is higher or less. And then from there, I make a more objective decision based off what the data is saying. So I think on average it's around like 0.32 meters a second. If it's slightly faster than that, I know that I'm having a good day. I can actually push the load up a little bit more of what was pre-planned. If the velocity is slightly down, then I know that I probably need to reduce it back. And what it's been really good for is that everyone knows that things fluctuate on a day-to-day basis and a week-to-week basis. I'm quite fortunate that like everything's quite controlled outside of the gym, like Mark said last podcast. But like my sleep's good every single time, my food's good every single time. I train at the same time. So for me, the fluctuations are more from like the training stress. And there'll be weeks during a cycle where I'll feel weaker or stronger than others, and this objectively gives me the data to tell me how much I should push and if I should ease back, because nobody likes to ease back. And when you make the decision yourself, if you have a single at 7 RPE for the 4 weeks in a row, there's got to be fluctuations there. And let's say week 3 I always feel a little bit weaker. Without the data, I'd still try and force the weight to be as high as the other weeks, and then all of a sudden the fatigue's a little bit higher, and then that has that knockdown effect into the next week. But having this data to say, right, Luke, today you're lifting 10% slower than the previous week, that should be reflected in your weight selection when you're doing your top sets. So it's helping me have the data to make the decisions that I know I should make, but without the information, I make bad decisions. So that's the main reason. Do you have a question, Mark?
Yes, no, it's great. I mean, that makes you probably feel a little bit better that it's like, right, the data says this. I'm not feeling guilty for backing off a little bit or for pushing on a bit. I think also it's like, sorry, go on, Ben.
No, go on. I
was just going to say, like, it's such a great example of, and this is to coaches as well as, people who are sort of, managing their own training, is the importance of a program and framework and structure can never be, overestimated. Like it's so important, like so important. But I think what we in the industry have learned probably a lot over the last 10 years is having that ability. Yes, we're working within a very strict framework, but within the micro of that is the ability and adaptability to change based on the factors you're talking about. Training stress for you, for the rugby guy, it could be a harder game on a Saturday. You've played last season, if you played a game, you play Newport, for example, Christ, I can't move for 3 days. Whereas if we pay someone who's bottom of the league, I can come in on Sunday and do a session.
There's a reason why like team sports, like there's a reason why the higher end team sports are using these, because this was going to be my point. For me, everything's super controlled, and I feel they're about the same every single time.
But it's still useful.
Yeah, but for people like yourself that like play these team sports, it's ridiculously good, because you're going to get guys that want to absolutely hammer the gym every single time. And if you give them the rep one and you say, right, you need to hit, if you want to do this weight, you need to hit 0.4 meters a second on this weight, otherwise you've got to go down. And if you make them do that, then it makes them control it. And then the second thing is actually just making that point, like it gives you more intent to try and lift things as forcefully as we can, which we know is great for your force output as well. There's studies looking at like having this data straight after to say like, am you lifting more forcefully? Having these instant feedback, it makes you lift more intentfully. So you probably get a bit better of a stimulus as well. So it can be great for that as well.
Question, Luke, do you feel like since you've been using it, like you say, you are, because you know you're getting that direct feedback, are you feel like you're lifting like you try, it's like playing a game, isn't it? You're trying to reach that number each time.
Yeah.
It's
because I mean,
go on.
It's, I mean, you can look at things and you can say, oh great, yeah, like this is moving well today, but like the difference between 0.25 meters a second and 0.27 is huge. It's like 10%, but it's so hard to catch it on the eye. And the only caveat to it is like you can take it too far, I think. And there are like instances where like I'll lift and it'll be slightly slow and it'll be like, oh, I made a small like mistake, like my weight felt slightly forward or back, and as a result then it was a touch slower. Or on odd instances, like your technique can break down and you can actually lift faster. So it's still having like your coaching head on and having your like to be like strong enough to almost override the machine every so often and say, actually, I made a mistake, so I can actually push on.
Especially with your more beginner intermediates, I imagine that would happen a lot more, wouldn't it? Like, is actually it was the lift was slower because of a technical issue, not because of a fatigue issue.
Yeah, and it is difficult to say, but I do actually think, I mean, they're expensive, they're like £400, but I think like actually the people that would benefit the most would be like your intermediates that have got high external stress and team sports. People that like have these mad fluctuations day to day would probably really benefit from it in terms of choosing the right number.
Have you ever used the the push bands? You ever use them?
I haven't, no.
It's a similar sort of concept. It's just a little bit cheaper. You can wear it like on your arm, or you can put it around the bar, and it does the same thing.
Has Max got one of those?
Yeah. We've used them on our course at uni as well. And it's just when you're getting that direct feedback, it is good.
It's great that these tools are available. I'm going to sound like a dinosaur here, but like back when I was doing the masters, like it was literally, if you didn't have access to force plates, and if anyone, force plates, for those who don't know, are like literally electronic plates that are built into the platform, and you can get some amazing data out of them, but they're about 25 grand a pop. So unless you're a top university or a Premier League football team, you're not going to have access. And even then, the data is an absolute nose. Like you need a lab rat to sit there for a day to digest the data and actually put it into something useful. So these tools are far more practical alternatives for sure.
I'm not sure if you've, mate, I mean, we talked about what's going to be big in 2021. I don't think in 2021, but 2022, everyone will be using a velocity tracker. Did you see Elikov released a new barbell? Did you see it? It's got a velocity tracker built into the bar.
No. Wow.
It's ridiculous. So like the one about there's a couple of people that have spoke recently about changing the rules in powerlifting to be like for the bench press, to make it an actual like full range of motion, more appeasing bench press. But it could be a way to actually get like the range, like they could set in like a minimum range of motion detail. So yeah, each bar, like that's cool. You can imagine like a high end like rugby team having 20 Eleco bars with the velocity tracker built in, and just having it on their phone and just tracking the details straight away. That's the future. The big thing on the velocity tracker that I really like, which I didn't think would be a massive thing, is the range of motion indicator. So it tells you how much range of motion you've gone through. And I've been using it about a month or two now. And I know now like exactly how much range of motion I need to have hit depth on a squat. But then also a big one is the bench press. Trying to get that range of motion as small as you can, and then just seeing how, like, if you don't quite get yourself set up into the most optimal position, that the range of motion increases. And again, the effect that has on like my next set, where I look at like the velocity and I look at how it correlates with the range of motion. So let's say I think it's 30 centimeters, my bench, and then if it goes to 32 centimeters on rep 2 and it's a touch slower, I'm like, well, okay, I lost a little bit of position, didn't quite get the same optimal setup. As a result, the velocity was slower. And if you can see it like going down each set, it really forces back to you about like the importance of getting that optimal setup. And then from a squat perspective, I know I can say, oh yeah, I think I hit depth, and you can watch it all you want, but like having the number as well is just another tick to say if you're hitting the same standards that you want. But the bench press one's really interesting. I use it with a client that's the British bench press champ at the minute, and like you can see it in his own setup, but he can't see it. Like he's an excellent bencher, but he just couldn't quite see that he was breaking down in form. But he's like an absolute numbers guy. And now that I can say, mate, you can see your range of motion every single set is increasing, and you can see that obviously the velocity would drop off anyway, but you can see like it dropping down more significantly than if you'd have held a position. And straight away, like he gets it, versus me telling him every single week. The data's there, and it's so good.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. A funny one with that guy is he deadlifts on grass. And he didn't realize, because it was on grass, that the plates had sank like 2 centimeters. So he was lifting from a 5 centimeter deficit, and then he checked it. He leveled it back out, and he could see on the rep 1 how much extra he was lifting, but he didn't realize. It's pretty funny.
There's a lot more you can get from it actually than even I first thought, especially with the range of motion stuff. That's really interesting. Right, it's very, very much so from a powerlifting perspective, probably more than anything, but still very useful to anyone really. It's great.
Absolutely. Like the one nice thing is the correlation, and you can put in like if I get it up now, so if I go squat 20 days, so you can put it's difficult because you need to get the data, but like if I put in, so that's if I put my last squats in, so then that's like based off the last 2 weeks, my estimated 1RM squat would be 248, and it's just like you can see like the correlation with the velocity. It's not a dead cert, but it's really good. The only issue I've had with it is with deadlift. It's because I think with the deadlift, if you slightly move the bar or like pull the slack or roll it slightly, it starts to track the rep. So I need to play around with that, because at the minute it's saying every deadlift's really slow. And I know I'm a slow puller, but
Luke, is it the really slow? Is it the one that attaches to the bar and it's got the cord goes into the?
Yeah. So there's a magnet and there's a band as well. And you just put it around the bar. It just connects to anything that's metal, so you can do it to a plate or to a bar.
How accurate is it?
But it's 100% accurate apart from like user issues. So like if there's been times where like with a bench press, if you rack it out, it might start tracking the velocity there. And like I said, with the deadlift, if you move it slightly, every rep comes down really slow. So actually with the deadlift, I look more at like the peak velocity versus the average, because the average velocity is super slow, because I think it starts it when I've moved it slightly. So I need to play around with that.
I guess that's a bit of a negative and a positive how sensitive it is, because it's obviously makes it more accurate, but it's a bit of a nose if it starts in the wrong place.
It's very rare. Go on.
I was going to say, so would you recommend people buying one, or do you think you could find alternatives, or who do you reckon it's for, that sort of equipment?
I think if you're a high level person that's looking, Mark talked yesterday about like, get these 1 to 2% wins. And if you're looking for another 2% win, I'd get a velocity tracker. It's not going to absolutely revolutionize your training. It's just going to increase your accuracy. It's going to stop you making bad decisions, but it's not going to be an absolute game changer. Like my training hasn't been 100 times more efficient. It's just helped me make a couple of better decisions, and I haven't overshot a rep compared to how I would have since I've had it. It's been really good for that.
I think it's marginal gains, isn't it? And
100%
marginal gains for Bob, who's looking for a little bit of weight loss and looking to get into the gym. He's probably not going to get a lot out of it, but as you get into more of a competitive athlete, it can, as we know, the one of the buzzwords in sport over the years has been marginal gains, and it's a big one. Yeah, it's a big one. I think.
I actually think I think team sports would be fantastic, and imagine like if if Mark had, like, let's say Mark had bought 20 velocity trackers and he's got, 40 grand, absolutely, he's smashing.
The budget's gone, mate.
Yeah. But if you train, like, let's say you train like 10 professional rugby clubs and you had these velocity trackers, you could give people a program based off their individual velocity profiles, and you get them in for that low day and you say, look, we want you to keep the load really low. So I don't want you to go slow down more than 0.45 meters a second. And then that's going to encourage them to maximize that result, but it's limited them by the data. I think for like team sports and rugby players that have like this high stress days, big competitions affected by in season, I think it would be massive for them. So I think for team sports, it's the ultimate. For people that are like high level powerlifters that are looking for these 1-2%, I do think if it was like £100 general populations, 100%, like your intermediate level person that makes bad decisions, absolutely, it would be great for him. But at the minute, it's too expensive to justify for someone that is only going to get a couple of percent out of it, that isn't at the high level. But yeah, it's been cool, and I'm looking forward to kind of practicing a little bit more. And I guess, like, as you lift heavier weights, the accuracy of like the 1RM predictors will get better, and you'll get more data. You can get like velocity profiles yourself, and yeah, it's cool, man. I'm enjoying it.
Nice,
interesting.
Yeah, nice.
Cool.
What was it? What was it? Sorry, Luke.
What's the what? Sorry.
What was the name of it? The actual device?
Rep One.
Rep One.
Yeah.
You're on commission.
If you use code MSC10, it'll tell you to fuck off.
Fantastic. Any questions on that subject, guys? Or
I was going to say, on those days where, let's say you think you're feeling good, but then the velocity tracker says, you're not lifting as fast as you should be. Did you find it initially quite hard to think, well, I'm feeling good, why is it saying this? Like, and where do you draw the line between you making the decision rather than the numbers?
Yeah. I spoke a little bit earlier about, like, if there's technical breakdown, if I know I've made a mistake, I'll override it. Apart from that, I trust it completely. Because I typically run like a 4-week training block, and then I have a deload week. But then sometimes in the deload week, like after like 1 or 2 days on a deload, you start to feel a little bit better. I was like, I might be able to push this single at 7 RPE for the deload week. And then you get the velocity, and actually, like, you're lifting 10% slower than normal. And yeah, all of a sudden you're making a better decision. Well, normally I'd be like, I'm feeling good. Like, without the velocity tracker, I'd had this exact same kind of issue. I had the single, and I did a weight that's actually not that heavy, but because of the fatigue from the block, it was super, super slow, and it was a really bad decision that affected the next session. But because this time it said, like, you're lifting 10% slower than normal, drop the weight. I dropped it down, not 10%, but like 7% more. And it was around what I wanted it to be. So I would go with the machine pretty much every time, apart from if there was a technical mistake. Yeah.
Fantastic, guys. I think that's probably a good time to round up, unless there's anything else anyone wants to throw out there.
That's been a good eclectic.
That tracker sounds amazing, Luke. Would you say that, like, obviously it's not really worth if you just use it a few times. It's probably worth if you have one own and keep using it so you have all the data collected. Like, let's say if I would like to use yours, I wouldn't probably benefit out of it, like, for a few times.
Because literally you need to use it almost every single time, because the numbers by themselves mean absolutely nothing. Like, the first week, oh great, I moved that squat at 0.26, and I was like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, it means nothing. But then, like, over the next week, you start to get an indicator of what kind of percentage and what weight. Like, because if you get to, I'll show you now. So if you get to history, you can put in like these different filters. So let's say I go squat, and then I can put in like weight. So weight range from 180 to 210, and then apply. And then it shows me every squat that I've done. And then it gives you the velocities of them at the weights as well. So, like, if go on.
Do you pick the exercises? Like, you can pick what exercise you're doing?
Yeah. So when you set up the workout, you choose the exercise. So I don't use it for every exercise. I use it for just like the main ones. So like deadlift and like bench, squat, and then secondary lift. So pinch squat, pause squat. 2 can pause, but you can set up as many as you want. You can even add tags. Like, I don't use it, but my client uses tags. for like working set, warm up sets. So he even breaks it down further. But yeah, you can do it for every exercise. So if you use a weightlifter, you can do it for clean. You could do it for front squat. You can do it for everything.
I'd love to see it using ollie lifting. That would be interesting.
That would be.
It would be great because it moves so freely. Like it wouldn't be in the way at all. It'd be sick.
Fantastic. Okay, guys, fantastic. Cool. Thank you all for a fantastic podcast. I think that was a great one. Hopefully, our viewers enjoy that. Any feedback, guys? Get in touch.
Viewer.
Get in touch. Let us know. Huh?
Just viewer, not viewers. Viewer.
Yeah.
Graham.
Yeah, exactly.
Graham.
Yeah, Graham. Give us some feedback. Hope you enjoyed it. Cool. Thanks very much, guys. We'll leave that there. All the best.
Thanks, everyone.
Soon. Cheers.